Greetings, fellow HFY fans, and welcome, or welcome back. Before we begin, please take a moment to hit that like button down below, show it a little love. And now, on with the story. The Deathworlders, a story by Philip R. Johnson, aka Hambone, Hambone HFY, and Hambone 3110. Chapter 13, Tall Tales, Part 1. Author's note: this chapter was co-written alongside Rantarian and ties in with chapters 67 to 69 of Salvage. Reading that side of the story may help you make some sense of things. Brick, New Jersey, Earth. The name I was given at birth was not in fact Ravinder Singh. You see, it often surprises me just how few Americans know that India is a nuclear power. We have our stockpiles of weapons, our enrichment program, our power plants. Any nation which has a nuclear arsenal and is prepared for the possibility of nuclear war inevitably needs to employ experts in the effects, both the immediate ones and those that linger, of nuclear weaponry. That was me. I was, once, one of my home country's foremost experts in just what the bomb does to people and to places. A curious vocation for a Buddhist, maybe, but I viewed my role as being that of a peacemaker, or maybe a guardian, keeping the doors of hell locked. Maybe if I could impress seriously enough just how terrible a thing these weapons are, make my nation's leaders see that nothing good could ever come from their deployment, that awful force might be kept in check. No matter, the point is, I am one of only a handful of people in the world who know the full details of the Republic of India's nuclear program. You can see why my abduction would have caused alarm among the security and intelligence forces, the military. The fact that my eventual return to Earth landed me in the USA could only serve to compound that sense of alarm, hence my change of name and reclusiveness. You'll forgive me if I don't share my original identity. I doubt that India has forgotten me. But of course, you are not here for the story of why I'm living in brick, are you, Mr. Jenkins? 3 years and 8 months AV. Cimbrean colony, the far reaches. Oh, you should see her. She's getting so big, and we were all so proud of her when she played Mary for the Nativity last... Jennifer Delaney, mid-20s, space babe, and feeling happy for the first time she could remember to hear her mom's logorrhea. Tamsin Delaney had launched into her usual update on the lives of literally every person within a 10-mile radius of their house almost without preamble, as if it was just another daily message on her daughter's answer phone, rather than a pre-recorded video to be sent into space after years of not even knowing if she was still alive or not. It was comforting in its way. Normalcy amongst the weirdness. She hadn't changed a bit. Robert Delaney, on the other hand, had lost a huge amount of weight and lost the last color in his hair. He looked less amply jolly nowadays and more scholarly. It was quite a change, but Jen had to admit that the only other time she'd seen her old man look so good was in old pictures from the 80s. He seemed content to sit quietly, left arm around his chatterbox wife's shoulders, and just listen with a faint smile. But just as Tamsin was launching into the chapter about non-family members, he rolled his eyes and held up a tablet computer he'd been holding out of sight from behind the couch. Written on it, large enough for the camera to see, were the words, "What she's trying to say is," he swiped down, "I love you, and I miss you, and I pray every day that you're safe out there." He smiled, chin wobbling, and swiped down one last time. "We both do." By the time Jen's eyes were dry again, most of her mom's monologue was over, and she wound down with a few anecdotes about the daughter of somebody who had babysat Jen 20 years previously and of whom she had no memory, before glancing anxiously at somebody outside the camera's field of view. "Is that okay?" "I'm sure she'll love it," the operator assured her. Robert grinned at him from behind his wife's back. "Well, be safe, darling. Come home soon." The video ended. "Want to go home?" old Jen asked. "No." She had been doing that more and more lately, talking to herself, carrying on a conversation between old Jen, the IT cubicle mouse whose sole experience with men had consisted of a few awkward and ill-advised fumbles, and new Jen, the competent, confident, and slightly cold and battle-scarred space babe, It had helped her to get through months of isolation during the long walk, but the habit was ingrained now. Perhaps even more alarmingly, old Jen seemed to have a voice of her own now. A shy, querulous voice that longed for safety, for warmth and comfort, to go back to her own bed and maybe a cat and a goldfish and shove her head under the pillow and forget. If she hadn't been a genuinely nice person, Jen suspected that she would have hated herself. As it was, she accepted the voice of her own timidity for what it really was, her past. And her past was a story of fear, weakness, and lethargy. Everything that kept a person back, kept them in a cubicle, kept them too afraid to talk to boys. Everybody had that voice. At least she knew when hers was talking. Still, sometimes it was all right to let old Jen cry, so long as she wiped away the tears and kept putting one foot in front of another. There was some shouting outside, which meant that Kirk had probably arrived. It was only his imminent arrival, along with the influx of colonists from Earth, including Jen's replacement, that had persuaded her to finally watch the video from her parents and read the messages from her friends and more distant relatives. After today, there would be no further opportunities. She just wasn't sure what she was going to do. She wasn't going back to Earth, that much was certain, and she couldn't stay here, even if her bath was here. And there was the awful big question of keeping her head down and avoiding being noticed by the Great Hunt, but she'd figure it out. Starship Sanctuary, Cimbrean local space, the far reaches. I swear I don't know why you upgraded this thing to be so comfortable when we hardly spend any time inside of it. It wasn't originally supposed to be just the two of us, Julian. Right. Still can't believe the other 23 went back to Earth. Oh, they'll be back. I was wrong about something way back when. You'll have to tell me later, Kirk. Hurry up and get us landed. Long-range sensors are picking up an ALV drive signature. Looks big enough to be a frigate, or maybe even a cruiser. We want to be inside the colony's camouflage field before they get close enough to spot us. Just the one? A ship that big shouldn't be out this far. Shouldn't? Maybe. Is? Yes. Get us down there. Aye, aye. Cimbrean colony. The far reaches. Fucking hell, they're coming in pretty hard. The sanctuary was hammering down at the core of a trail of plasma. Powell and all the rest ducked down against a sudden blast of air, and the whole colony shook as the ship extended its fields, pancaking the air below it into a 100-meter-tall cushion that shoved the fireball sideways, scything off the top of some nearby trees. Jesus H. Titty fucking Christ, Legsy yelled, a sentiment echoed in assorted vulgarities from all across the camp. Thrumming smugly, Sanctuary settled gently onto the landing field. The fuck was that all about? Powell demanded as the ramp dropped and Kirk's partner in crime, Julian, staggered out and sat down heavily. The camouflage field working? He asked. Franklin, camo the field, Powell yelled at the SEAL whose job was to handle the colony force field. On it! The field shimmered, moving from optimal collecting mode to a wide-effect digital camo that would, in theory, make the colony very difficult to see from orbit. Julian stood up. There's a ship coming in, he explained. The trooper responsible for the colony's sensor array, really just the feed from a number of stealthy microsatellites in geosynchronous orbit, had already grabbed his gear before Powell could turn to him and shout him into action, and was busy checking it. Confirmed, he called out. One warp signature, incoming at superluminal from out system. Looks like they're coming from Kelsey space. Powell released a frustrated grunt. Intel says that the Alliance was stepping up anti-piracy ops in this sector. If it's the fucking Russians, he trailed off, not finishing the thought. If it was the Russians, then the whole Cimbrean operation might well be fucked. Moscow's aligning itself with the Kelsey had caused quite the political row back at home, where most everybody favored neutrality in the interstellar conflict. While the Alliance hadn't been responsible for the Sol quarantine, their condemnation of the enclosure had smacked more of expedient propaganda than actual moral outrage. They're slowing. Sublight, Baker added. Active ping, we just got scanned. Think they saw anything? Fields up, camo's running. At that range, if our gear's working as advertised, no they didn't. Good. If this is just a patrol, hopefully they'll have a look and move on. Baker watched the screen for a good minute. They're not, he decided. Looks like they're pulling into low orbit, set to sweep directly over us in 10 mics.
Shit. Okay, get the Skymaster ready.
Jen glanced at the imposing device in the heart of the camp. The Skymaster was a repurposed M242 Bushmaster mounted on a complicated gyroscopic base and field emitter array that transformed into an effective ground-to-orbit weapon. It had been one of the first things the platoon had set up after the force field had come online. As she watched, it pivoted and swung skywards, aiming into the western sky. 9 mics, Baker warned. Powell nodded grimly. His face had had the same cold, calculating look that Adrian used to wear in moments of real danger.
Prepare to active ping, he ordered. If we see any sign that they're hostile, we shoot first and the questions can go fuck themselves.
Baker confirmed the order, then counted down. 8:30. Jen cleared her throat. You sure about this? She asked.
Sure as I'll ever be. Baker, active ping.
The sensor specialist nodded and tapped something in his equipment. He gritted his teeth at what he saw. "Ah, shit, their grav spike's up," he reported. Powell spun and addressed the 2 men manning the Skymaster.
Gun team, 5 rounds ASX.
5 rounds ASX ready. Lock.
Fire!
The Skymaster thumped. Jen felt it in her chest as the weapon opened a force field-walled tube of vacuum in front of it, into which it fired a round which accelerated away on a warp pulse in a line of exotic blue radiation. The warp field would collapse scant millimeters from the target's hull, delivering a round long before the Kelsey cruiser could even register that it was under attack. In theory, if the cruiser's shields were still down while its warp field dissipated, the rounds would strike its hull unimpeded, smashing through the fragile ceramic armor tiles and delivering shaped explosive charges directly into the superstructure. If its shields were up, in theory the gun would overwhelm them with sustained fire, but during that time the cruiser might lower its spike and flee, blowing Cimbrean's cover. Baker's report soothed that particular worry. Target's well hit and deorbiting, but they're still intact. Communications could still be up. Powell set his jaw.
5 more. Fire for effect.
5 more. Fire! The gun slammed into life again, and Jen felt her heart jump at her chest as 5 more rounds in as many seconds vanished skywards, pulsing upwards on a streak of blue light. Powell keyed his radio.
Kirk, get ready to hit orbit and fuck off. If this all goes to shit, we need it reported back to Earth. Jen, you'd best go with him.
Right. Take care of this place, Powell, Jen said, while old Jen whimpered objections at her about not abandoning everyone.
You didn't even name this place, Powell objected.
Folktha, Jen called as she ran. It's called Folktha. She jogged behind the slender alien as he cantered across the lawn and scrambled up the sanctuary's ramp. Julian had sprinted ahead and was already powering up the ship's kinetics so the door closed. We good to go? He asked. Kirk shook his head, a slow gesture on his long-necked kind. Not yet. That ship will see us if we take off right now, and his gravity spike is still up. They'll get a good look at us if we run now. We need to wait until it's below the horizon. And then? And then we go with Plan B, I suppose. I hope that's not the Plan B I'm used to, old Jen muttered, soda-voiced. Louder, she asked, What's Plan B? We deploy the system defense field we stole from the Confederacy, Julian told her. An expedient solution, but also a politically awkward one, Kirk expanded. It would damage Earth's reputation and bargaining position. I was instructed that the survival of the colony is more valuable, but the fewer pawns we sacrifice, the better, Julian finished. Jen blinked. Somebody stole one of those things for us. Julian did, Kirk said, a revelation which caused her to re-examine Julian. After his stammering embarrassment at finding her in the bath, she'd pegged him as another Dara, and largely ignored him. Stupid of me, she realized, examining him with new Jen's eyes for danger. That earnest, cautious expression had done a good job of hiding the fact that he was fit, strong, scarred, and clearly a survivor. It was only the slightly pathetic reaction he'd had to being in the presence of her, a woman, she realized, that had made her dismiss him. Had he been standing with more confidence, she would have had no trouble imagining him stealing hardware like that. At least it was a lesson learned harmlessly. What's going on out there anyway? She asked, changing the subject. Brick, New Jersey. Did you know the Cortai never dabbled in nuclear fission on anything more than an experimental basis? 3 deaths and an event that came alarmingly close to being their own version of Pripyat later, and they abandoned the program and never spoke of it again. I found that interesting. Of course, that was before their eugenics program and after their intellect had expanded and their compassion had shriveled. They were well past the point of need to meddle with such comparatively crude science. The Cortai who abducted me. Do you meditate? You should. I was taken while meditating and did not even notice until I opened my eyes again. Their names were Hayek and Twanri, a mated couple, and as close as the Cortai ever come to being head over heels in love. Nice enough people if one overlooked their condescending habit of constantly attempting to impress upon the lesser species just how intellectually superior they were. I was not impressed. They had deliberately stolen me to tap me for expertise that they themselves lacked, after all. Oh, don't get me wrong. Cortai school children would regard the class on radioisotope decay as mundane and boring. But there's a gulf of difference between academic understanding of what causes nuclear fission to happen and direct experience and knowledge of what the effects are when it happens uncontrolled. For that, they turned to the human race. We aren't the only species to have detonated those weapons, nor to have dabbled in nuclear fission with the safeties off. But we are by far the most intelligent of those races which did so. That's probably why they spent so much time repeating their obvious mental advantages. Insecurity. They chose 2 of us, myself and Mikhail, a Ukrainian gentleman who offered guided tours of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and chose, it must be said, perfectly. You could not have asked for a better pair to give you a complete analysis of both the academic and practical consequences of the aftermath of a nuclear event, which, of course, gave us something of a hint as to what we were there to do. Adams had a secondary role besides manning the force field, namely communications, and he called out as something on his own gear beeped. "They're hailing," he reported. Powell frowned.
"Can they escape now?"
Baker shook his head. "No way, that ship's coming down hard."
"Fuck it. May as well hear the bastard's last will and fucking testaments. Open the line."
The voice that came through was clearly Australian and desperate. "Attention, assholes! Please stop fucking shooting at us. We are not Alliance. I repeat, we are just a pack of poor fucking bastards in need of some goddamned help." There was a long, embarrassed pause among the soldiers. Then Powell leaned forward, took hold of the microphone, and replied.
"Attention, ship. Ceasing fire. You are to proceed as follows. Crouch down, tuck your head between your legs, and kiss your asses goodbye. Sorry."
There was no response from the radio. The silence on the ground was eventually broken by Legsy. "Fucking helpful, that advice, sir," he commented. Several of the men released the laughs they'd been holding back.
"Shut the fuck up and get the lads ready to abandon base if we have to," Powell ordered. "Actually, fuck it. Where's it coming down?"
Baker scratched his head. "She's aiming for that big lake to the east." The captain glanced at the sensor screen, then grabbed his field binoculars and turned to face westwards, raising them to his face. Other heads turned to follow his aim. Some few seconds later, a cloud formation withered and died in the face of an incredible heat as the Alliance cruiser wallowed through it. The ship was coming in at a shallow angle from low in the western sky, wreathed in smoke and fire as its shields struggled to stay up and ward off the hammering force of atmosphere. As they watched, a flicker and failure robbed the ship of what might have been an engine or something, which peeled off and corkscrewed away towards the south. "No way is that thing surviving the hit," someone opined.
"We'll check it out anyways. There's at least 1 human on board, so we need to identify the body if naught else," Powell replied. "Legsy, get the mules and one of the trucks started up. Send half the lads out there."
"Which truck, sir?"
"I don't fucking care. The one with the broken mirror."
He keyed his radio.
"Oi, Kirk. Hold off on escaping for now. Looks like we've got a couple of hours to check and see if aught survived the crash. You may as well unload the colonists."
There was a pause, and then the alien simulated voice replied with a single professional word. "Understood." Seconds later, the sanctuary emitted a dull thud that must have been its end of the jump array accepting an arrival. It was only the first of the 10 that would deliver the first colonists and their equipment and effects to Cimbrean. 10 minutes later, Powell was riding shotgun in one of the mules as it bounced and skidded across the fertile floodplains. The stream that ran through the palace grounds at Folktham met up with a larger river, which in turn flowed out to the inland sea, from which a column of white smoke provided a clear marker as to the final resting place of a downed cruiser. The mules were half pickup truck, half quad bike, and quite capable of getting themselves out of damn near anything the terrain might snare them with, or, in the worst case, being physically hauled out by some strong men. Their supply of the diesel the little vehicles ran on was limited, but the development plan included finding a local plant species to refine into a biofuel. Besides, if anybody had survived the splashdown, the platoon needed to have men on the shore waiting to collect sooner rather than later, and the only way to get down there fast enough was by vehicle. They pulled themselves to a loam-spraying halt as the sky flashed brilliantly from the direction of the sea. Every man in the mules in the truck flung themselves overboard and hit the dirt, half expecting a lethal shockwave to rampage up the valley and toss the vehicles flying, the product of some kind of nuclear meltdown or similar cataclysm. What instead arrived, after too many tense heartbeats, was a great echoing thunder of detonation that went on too long and was too gentle at that range to have been anything so apocalyptic. "The fuck just happened?" one of the SEALs asked, being the first to break the silence. "Maybe it ought blew up," opined a Canadian SOR trooper.
"That'd put paid to any survivors then," Powell said. "Better hope not. We've still got a human to bag and tag. Mount up, let's get down there."
Waves were still lapping on the sands and pebbles when they halted on the beach, and not a moment too soon. A trio of what looked like cargo transports of some kind were hovering across the water, propelled by rowing, of all things. A disheveled hulk of a man, all muscles, wild hair, wilder eyes, and unkempt beard, splashed into the surf and waded ashore. He raised his hands in response to the guns that immediately aimed at him, but smiled. "G'day," he said. Folk the Colony, Cimbrean, the Far Reaches. Powell's decision to order Kirk to remain had paid off, allowing the first civilian contractors and colonists to traverse the jump array from Earth. Already, a team of determined-looking men were setting off into the forest with electric chainsaws, bent on constructing a log cabin to serve as a bunkhouse, as a rather more solid and permanent alternative to the tents of the military camp. Somehow, they'd even managed to squeeze a tiny backhoe into the minuscule space available inside Sanctuary's end of the array, which was busily going to work laying the foundations for the bunkhouse and projects that would follow. Jen wondered where whichever government or governments were responsible for this whole plan had found civilians with the right skills who could be trusted with the secret and were willing to take the risk. There must have been months and months of planning behind this venture, at a bare minimum. "Miss Jennifer Delaney, I presume." The voice had an accent that was pure southern England, reminding her vaguely of red tunics, flags, and old stone buildings. It belonged to a slim, earnest-looking man in his late middle age who had extended a hand as they'd met. "Just Jen," she asserted herself. Formality could go wrestle a Volza. She shook his hand, though, prompted by old Jen into remembering that preferring to be informal didn't mean needing to be rude. "Jen it is," the newcomer agreed, amicably. "I'm Sir Jeremy Sandy, C.H., your replacement as governor here." "Oh, thank goodness, that's a weight off my shoulders," Jen admitted. "I've not done much governoring. I'm afraid I'm not cut out for desk work." "No, indeed. You look like you'd find it bloody stifling," Sir Jeremy readily agreed. Jen found that she liked the man, despite the pomp and poshness of his accent. Even if he was just very good indeed at reading people and saying what they wanted to hear, it was still nice to be charmed after months or, hell, years, with no company but Adrian, herself, aliens, and a platoon of terrifyingly intense special forces. "I can't help but notice that you're about as English as the Queen," she said. "Is Cimbrean a British colony now, or—" "The King nowadays," Sir Jeremy revealed. "But yes, it is. There was a lot of legal wrangling and the courtroom drama involved, but ultimately Britain successfully argued that because the colony's founder and first governor is a British national, as is its first military commander," he waved a hand, dismissively indicating what had surely been an extended and heated debate within the halls of power, Of course, that argument was much easier to make considering the confidential nature of the project. The absolute requirement of secrecy around Cimbrean's development stopped it from ballooning into the political row of the century. That makes sense, Jen considered. Well, it probably won't remain British for so very long. The Chinese, Argentinians, and Russians are all making uncomfortable noises about expansion and imperialism. Who knows? It could become the fifth member of the Union, or an overseas territory. But I think that more likely Cimbrean will, well, quietly, respectfully, and by common consent, go independent once on her feet, and become a Commonwealth member. Assuming she survives, Jen pointed out. If the Great Hunt finds this place... We have a contingency prepared, Sir Jeremy assured her. In fact, you'll be pausing during your departure to deploy it. Oh? Kirk will explain. Let's just say that the need for absolute secrecy is going to be resolved soon. Among other things, a leak is inevitable, so we need to go public with the project sooner rather than later. So it can have a positive spin put on it. As you say, Sir Jeremy smiled. He looked around, drawing a deep and contented breath. Gosh, clean air. Clean, yes, but it's also a bit thin next to what you're used to. Don't exert yourself too hard here at first, or you'll feel sick and shaky. Yes, I still remember the briefing. Still, it's refreshing. I've spent months in offices in London and Toronto ahead of this assignment. Finally being here is wonderful. You'll enjoy the night sky then, Jen told him. There's no light pollution here, so you can see everything. I bought a telescope among my personal effects, Sir Jeremy admitted. I've always been something of an amateur astronomer. The chance to survey new stars and constellations was part of what convinced me to take this commission. Well, we've got a couple of hours before the expedition gets back from investigating that crashed cruiser, so welcome to Folktha. I'll give you the guided tour before we go. Delighted, Sir Jeremy exclaimed, and took her arm. It was an avuncular, unconsciously friendly gesture, and Jen quite forgot to stiffen at the unexpected contact. Folktha? He asked. Jen smiled. There's a story behind that, she began. The enormous human wasn't quite aiming his weapon at Saunders, but then again, Gayatin doubted that he needed to. The squad of humans on the beach were quite plainly the most dangerous thing he'd ever laid eyes on, each one of them comfortably wearing a harness of thick armor plating covered in a drab blend of greens and soil tones that his eyes almost wanted to skip off of and treat as part of the background. And a gun that Gayatin doubted he would even be able to lift. All bar the big one with the biggest gun were intimidatingly anonymous, their faces covered in black masks with the lenses of a brilliant orange over their eyes. He flopped onto the beach, growling in pain at what was almost certainly a fractured bone high in his chest, and was surprised when one of the humans lowered his weapon and dashed over to him, unslinging from his back a bag of what were clearly medical supplies. It immediately became apparent that the human had no transplanter implant or technology on his person, but even in the curious cadences of an alien language, his tone of voice was reassuring and cheerfully optimistic as he drew a slim white cylinder from his pocket. Gayatin was in too much pain to really be too worried about the language barrier anyways, and he just gratefully rested his head on the sand, awaiting his treatment. It came as a large disappointment when, muttering quietly to himself, the human scribbled a rune or letter of some kind on a piece of paper with a marker and pinned it to Gayatin's overalls before leaving and checking on a Kurumbura crewman some ways down the beach. Gayatin was about to raise his voice in protest and demand to know whether the human felt that some curious ritual involving paper was going to mend a broken bone, when the man simply touched the Kurumbura on one shivering flank reassuringly, before checking on the next crewman without leaving a note or rune. This one received more attention, with an injection from a small, presumably disposable needle of some substance or another. It seemed to work as the fallen crew members' pained noises rapidly subsided, to be replaced by an apparently gentle slumber. Triage, Gayatin realized, as the medic dashed from crewman to crewman, assessing the injuries. Mostly he just repeated the action of labeling his patients, but here and there administering an injection of some drug or another. The unconscious human, Markovitz, was loaded onto a small ground vehicle which roared away in a spray of kicked-up sand. The mostly sane one, Kaminsky, was likewise loaded onto a vehicle, but this one was also occupied by a human who had the body language of the one in charge. They were just close enough for Gaetan's translator to decide it could hear the rush-in's half of the conversation. The other didn't appear to have a translator of its own. Kaminsky, Roman, Captain, Spetsnaz. The other human spoke. The language was a staccato one, short, clipped consonants separated by long, broad vowel sounds, punctuated halfway through by what was unmistakably a fucking. Gaetan still hadn't quite figured out why humans referred to the act of copulation completely out of context so frequently, but he had come to recognize the word by sound. I understand. Our missions are at cross purposes. I had no idea the West had forces off-world. Gibberish. There was a questioning note at the end of that sentence. Of course. I surrender, Captain. The two Deathworlders gripped each other's hands firmly, and the captain nodded, looking relieved. Babble, nonsense. Thank you. Kaminsky glanced around and then leaned closer to the other human and spoke confidently, too quietly for Gaetan to overhear. The captain frowned, then turned to the enormous human with the giant gun.
Leg Z, jabber, gobbledygook.
The big one nodded sharply, then marched forward, stuck the vast weapon into the small of Adrian's back, and ordered something. Yammer, fucking prattle. Sure, mate. Whatever, Saunders agreed, and then started walking, placing his hands gently atop his head. Gaetan wasn't sure if the easy, relaxed swagger in his movements was a symptom of bravado or honest insanity. He stopped paying attention when the human medic returned and extended a hand. Gaetan took it with his good hand and was hauled, gently and respectfully, but with the inexorable force of a human's incredible strength, to his feet, offering words which, while Gaetan couldn't understand them, promised medical attention and a future which didn't include imminent death. Maybe they aren't all completely crazy. Brick, New Jersey. Our first destination, after we had finally calmed Mikhail down and he had agreed not to reduce our abductor to a fine paste, was a Class 11 world. I wish I knew its location or anything more about it than its classification, but it was a pleasant place. Clement warm weather, stunning scenery, gravity just a little lighter than Earth's, atmospheric pressure just a little higher. I felt quite buoyant. Mikhail complained of the heat. Supposedly, the world was home to a host of terrifying plagues, but neither of us ever got so much as a sniffle. Incompatible with human biology, I suppose. Or maybe Earth's plagues are just nastier still. Who knows? Have you ever heard a Geiger counter in action? Many people are alarmed by just how rapidly and often they click just in response to background radiation. That in itself really ought to be a clue as to just how cruel a Mother Earth is when you stop to think about it. That the basic background level of radiation to which we are entirely accustomed seems excessive to us when we first learn of it. That in itself really ought to be a clue as to just how cruel a Mother Earth is when you stop to think about it. That the basic background level of radiation to which we are entirely accustomed seems excessive to us when we first learn of it. Well, this planet, I suspect that it would only be the first of many we visited, so I named it Prathama, had a background radiation much lower than that of Earth. It was so low, in fact, that Mikhail and I both fretted that the counter was broken and requested replacements. The replacements corroborated the original, and in hindsight, why would an alien world have the same background radioactivity as Earth? It would hardly be an alien world if it was identical, would it? We had been dropped on this world and told to search the area. Given who we were and the equipment our employer had granted us, it wasn't hard to put together that we were searching for fallout zones, but wasn't clear was why. Deathworlds, after all, are supposed to be uninhabited. Humanity, we are told, is a lone statistical anomaly, one race to defy the odds. If that were true, and if space-faring sophons avoid Deathworlds out of sensible caution, then why would there be any kind of evidence of nuclear catastrophe on the surface of such a world? Folktha, Cimbrean. A cry of, "They're coming back!" echoed across the camp. Sir Jeremy turned to his predecessor as Cimbrean's colonial governor and extended a hand. "Best of luck, Jen," he said. "And you, Sir Jeremy," she replied, shaking it. "Enjoy the paperwork." You can call me Jeremy, he allowed. I'll make sure to have the bath enclosed and hooked up to hot water. You will always be welcome here. She smiled. Thanks. A quick check showed that the truck was picking its way down the hillside. They had only a few minutes until the survivors from the ship reached the camp, and neither Jen nor Kirk had any intention of being identified as having been present. I'd better run. Before you go, Sir Jeremy rummaged into his pocket and produced a folded envelope. This is from the Prime Minister. He would like you to do something more for Earth. I suspect you'll find it more to your liking than governoring. Oh? You'll have your own spaceship for a start. Read it as you go. I'll do that. See you when I see you, Jeremy. They shook hands, and she ran sure-footed across the palace rubble and across the open field up the sanctuary's ramp, which closed behind her.
Just in time, Kirk said. I was about to leave you.
Sanctuary's engines heaved, and she popped up and was gone in a startlingly short space of time, inertial compensation making the whole exercise feel eerily detached from the way the ground retreated and curled at the edges in short order. Jen's last glimpse of Folktha was when the camo field snapped on below them, obscuring the vehicles just before they entered the camp. They paused when Cimbrean itself was nothing more than a distant crescent sliver of blue-white, so small that she could have covered it with a pinhead at arm's length, and Sanctuary pulsed once as Kirk fired something into orbit around the star. What was that? She asked.
System defense field, Kirk said. A little modified. The colonists brought it back from Scotch Creek with them.
Oh? A whole system, like the one around Earth?
Very similar, Kirk agreed. Except that we can turn this one off when we want to.
Jen said nothing and pulled the letter from her pocket. She was halfway through rereading it when Kirk interrupted her thoughts.
Ready to go to FTL, he informed her. Where would you like to go?
Erbzerk.
How are they doing?
The colony's newly arrived doctor was an American, Dr. Martin Adams, and had undergone extensive training in non-human anatomy and medicine just as a precaution. He had, to put it mildly, been surprised as hell to have to practice his skills the instant he arrived. He and Powell had met briefly during the preliminary phases of the colony operation. He had the intense, competent air of somebody who threw themselves completely into their work. One of the Vizcatics died, he reported. Not much we could do for her. The rest, well, I've set their bones, cleaned and dressed their wounds, and made them comfortable, but they just don't heal as fast as we do. Some of them are going to be in here for a long while. Frankly, it's a good thing we all have those disease suppression implants, or there'd be serious trouble already.
And the Spetsnaz? Powell asked him.
Kaminsky's basically fine. I've got his arm plastered and a big glass of water sorted out the last of that pixie dust stuff. There's nothing I can do for the other guy, though. I got an IV in him, but if or when he pulls through is out of my hands, Captain. Frankly, he needs to go back to Earth.
His only ride just left, too. All right, keep me posted. For now, I want a word with our POW.
He's over there. Dr. Adams jerked a thumb to a bed with curtains drawn. Knock yourself out. Kaminsky was sitting up on his cot, looking bored. The man standing guard over the prisoner was a valuable resource kept from doing something more constructive, Powell knew. Hopefully, Kaminsky would turn out to be cooperative, and his warder could be returned to a useful assignment. Russian was a language that still formed an important part of the modern British Special Forces soldiers' curriculum, but he knew only a few key phrases. Still, it seemed only polite to use them.
Got cure, Captain?
He asked. Kaminsky's English wasn't perfect, and he was heavily accented, but it was a damn sight better than Powell's Russian. The translator implants he'd received from the Alliance were useless. Powell didn't have a matching set for them to talk with. Still, he might come in handy as an interpreter for the alien prisoners. Better, the Spetsnaz captain replied. I could do with vodka, though. Several vodkas.
You lost men on that ship? Powell asked.
Sorry. Yes, I did. The traps, ambushes, and maybe to that fucking foam. Kaminsky indicated the dormant form of Markovitz, then to an empty cot opposite his own. Sit down, he invited. Powell did so.
So, I want to strike a deal, mate, he said.
Kaminsky looked interested. What deal?
If I have to, I'll need to assign a guard to you at all times, and I've got fucking precious few men to waste on that duty. You can see how a Russian Special Forces trooper smack in the middle of my mission is a bit of a sticky wicket.
I see that.
So, do I have to?
What is your offer? Kaminsky asked carefully.
Quid pro quo, mate. A little information, and I might be persuaded you're going to behave yourself, and I could put Private Hodder back to work.
Where I'm from, my interrogation would not be so pleasant, Kaminsky joked.
Been there, fucking done that, Powell told him. But I don't see the need to start with threats and pain when you and I can just come to an officer's agreement like.
I agree. It is better this way, Kaminsky said. But are you asking about the spaceship and how I came to be on it, or about my Australian friend with the alien mutant juice?
Alien mutant juice.
Powell's tone of voice was a flat repetition, but also a question. Just something he said, and my suspicions. I'll tell first one story and then the other, yes? Powell acquiesced with a bobble of his head and shrugged.
Sounds fair.
He listened. Kaminsky's life had rapidly swung for the strange the second he had encountered the now-crashed cruiser, moving from a relative cakewalk to a desperate fight to survive. All things considered, that the man had escaped with only some mild poisoning and a broken ulna to show for it was impressive. Whether out of soldierly efficiency, the Russian brevity, or simple terseness from being a slightly hesitant Anglophone, Roman's account didn't take long. They sat considering the implications for a while. Finally, Powell stood up and shook the Spetsnaz officer's hands.
I have your word you'll behave, he said.
I would like to go home as soon as possible, Kaminsky confessed. I think betraying your trust would only delay that.
Good enough for me, Powell said,
then deployed some of his own meager Russian again.
Spasibo za informaciju.
Kaminsky smiled. Pожалуйста, he said. Good luck with this Australian. He's crazy. Brick, New Jersey. We had grown so accustomed to the sporadic background noise of our counter that when it ticked up to what was, by any human standard, merely a healthy background, we both became quite fretful and uncertain. Our trepidation was not without good reason, it must be said. The difference between a perfectly safe exposure and a rapid but unpleasant death could just be whatever it is you're standing behind at the moment. From that moment on, we moved carefully. We tested the water, kept some clean water in a bottle to wash any fallout from our persons if we should be contaminated, paused every few hundred meters to probe the air, the soil, and the plants for contaminants. And we found them, oh yes, isotope concentrations in the soil, all from uraniums to K-chain. Signs of heavy metal poisoning in the local wildlife, including one unfortunate predator that must have had a vast concentration in its equivalent of liver concentrated into it by its food chain. It was lying, dying, by the side of the first sign of civilization we had seen, a road. Folk the Colony, Cimbrean, the Far Reaches. Adrian Saunders turned out to be huge. It had to be Saunders. Even though Jen had been perfectly convinced that he was dead, even without knowing the first name, there were no other Australians with engineering experience and military training on the abductee list. The guy wasn't tall. In fact, Powell had a good couple of inches on him, but he made up for it by plainly having the kind of physique that strongman competitors and bodybuilders beat themselves up in pursuing. It looked like working muscle, too, rather than pure steroidal bulk. He let the man stew for a few minutes as he sorted out some paperwork, including a quick reread of Saunders' file. When he judged that his prisoner was about on the verge of starting to fidget, he looked up and gave him his well-practiced, I really don't have time for this shit, and so you damn well better impress me look. Contrary to the usual response, Saunders instead smirked and laughed slightly.
I'm not finding this fucking funny, Powell snapped, shutting the man up even if his response was more arrogantly sullen than alarmed. Do you have any idea what kind of problems you've caused just by being here? If you are who I think you are, you've done a shite job of being dead.
And if I am who you think I am, you should have a long fucking think before making it known, Saunders retorted, though why he felt that should be the case was a mystery from Powell's perspective. Where's Jennifer Delaney?
You don't ask questions, Powell told him. You answer them.
This earned another insubordinate frown. Frankly, it was amazing that the man had made any kind of career in the military at all. His body language and defiant expression was more rebellious teenager than professional soldier. You bastards shot down my ship, he began to protest. Powell interrupted him, not in the mood to let this prisoner claim the initiative.
Captain Kaminsky tells me it was a pirate vessel, and that you only boarded it once he'd taken control of it, he said. In fact, he's told me quite a lot of interesting things about you.
Saunders gave a dismissive shrug. So, I'm the one who stole it most recently. I'm still the guy who crash-landed a starship on a planet and walked away, and that's not even the most fucking terrifying thing I've done this week. Powell had once led a team which infiltrated a jihadist compound specifically to stab one man and steal his notebook, then exfiltrated with the entire camp hunting for them. That had taken skill, courage, and no small amount of daring. Surviving a water landing in a starship, especially a badly damaged one, smacked of more luck, and luck, in his experience, was not to be relied upon, nor boasted about.
Not fucking impressed, mate, he said.
The dismissal seemed to score a hit, because Saunders shifted forward angrily and raised his voice, apparently oblivious to the 5 guns that all snapped to aim directly at him, and the way Powell's hand dropped to his holstered sidearm. I've just been in one merry jaunt through fucking hell, he snarled, and all I want is the answer to one goddamned question. Powell let the moment of tension play out until Saunders calmed down a bit and sat back. The angry shouting approach hadn't worked, forcing him into a more reciprocal, reasonable approach. Please, he said, eventually settling down. Powell kept his satisfaction from showing, and instead made a show of standing down in turn, as did his men.
Quid pro quo, then, he said. You answer my questions, and I'll answer what I can of yours. Something tells me neither of us are going to like the answers.
No fucking kidding, Adrian said. Well, I haven't liked much for as long as I can remember, so why the fuck should I start now? Where's Jennifer Delaney?
First, Powell persisted, your name.
He gave it a moment. Then, when no answer seemed forthcoming, he decided to say it outright.
You are Adrian,
the captive interrupted, jerking a thumb towards the soldiers.
You'd better trust these fuckers here implicitly if you're going to finish that sentence. Or maybe we can just assume that whatever you're going to say is right.
Powell gave him a cool stare. Of course he trusted them implicitly. This was a top-secret mission, and the men under his command were the best of the best. Not a single one of them was a security liability. Besides, whatever reasons the man felt he had for needing help on his secret superhero identity, and Powell wasn't about to rule out some kind of paranoid delusion, he hadn't yet revealed what they might be. Powell wasn't interested in playing interstellar man of mystery.
Saunders, he finished. As for Miss Delaney, you just missed her. She shipped out when we detected your mob coming in.
There was a long, bewildered pause. Then the Australian broke down and started laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a black, cynical one, the laugh of a man who'd just figured out that he was the butt of a sadistic sense of humor.
Of course! Of course she did, he exclaimed,
somewhere between the laughing and the sobs.
Gone home, I bet. No reason to wait for a dead man. Jesus fucking Christ.
Powell decided, as the Australian slowly pulled himself together, not to correct him on that point. Jen had clearly been holding a torch for this guy, but mental cases like this tended to be a danger to themselves and anybody nearby. Jen was too competent, capable, and useful a resource to endanger like that.
Kaminsky wasn't bloody kidding, he declared. Is the rest true? The infrared, the muscles.
Adrian nodded as he ran a rough hand through his beard and across his head. Yep, he said, voice still trembling. But I wouldn't fucking recommend it. How are the Russians doing? Quid pro quo, remember?
True enough. Kaminsky's recovered. We have no idea what's wrong with Markovic outside of pixie dust. Something to do with the alien fire suppressant?
Apparently, it sends you totally fucking mental before you go catatonic. At least that's what I've gathered from it, Saunders revealed. I'd stay away from that shit if I were you. No shit, Powell thought, feeling that his intelligence was being insulted. Who did this idiot think he was dealing with? There wasn't a soldier on Cimbrean who wasn't a veteran special forces. They didn't need advice from a crazed resurrectee. They needed the facts, unbiased and plain. Shit like, don't breathe in the toxic foam went without saying. He kept his cool by changing the subject.
You're a wanted man on Earth, you know, he told him, keeping his tone light and companionable. By rights, we're supposed to imprison you and keep you until we can send you back, but...
He looked the Australian up and down.
I can smell the kind of shit you're in, and I'm not going to put this colony and my mission at risk over a dropout who's legally fucking dead, he said. Do you know how long that paperwork takes? I don't have the fucking time nor the inclination, so long as you promise to get the fuck out of my hair and never come back. Spread the word there's naught but ruins on Cimbrean, and I might even be persuaded to see if there's aught useful that you can be doing instead of stealing pirate ships and chasing after a girl who's got her shit together way better than you do.
They stared at each other for a few moments. Then Adrian unclenched his fists, sighed, and nodded. Looks like you've still got some broken down old ships. I can probably put a working one together given a bit of time. A week, 2 at the most. Then I'll be out of your hair, he offered.
Good, Powell said.
Anything to get the man away from the colony and back out in the wider galaxy where he could do less harm.
We'll give you food, clothes, and shelter, and a fucking shave if you want it. But you need to get out of here before you become a problem. And for the moment, Captain, he added, stressing Saunders' former rank, you are going to give me a full debriefing.
He listened as the disgrace seated opposite him relented and launched into a characteristically foul-mouthed summary of everything that had happened to him since his abduction. What was clear was that Saunders was completely out of his gourd, and a danger to both himself and to everybody around him. He briefly entertained the thought of just shooting the dangerous Pratt then and there and giving him a grave somewhere in the Folkva Palace grounds. It would certainly have been the most expedient solution, and when it came down to it, the SPS had done a lot worse during their history for the sake of the mission than putting down a figurative rabid dog. It wasn't a choice between pragmatism and compassion so much as a choice between conflicting forms of pragmatism, really. In the end, letting him live won out. Getting the word spread that Cimbrean was uninhabited might just put paid to the rumors of a colonial effort that had lured Saunders here in the first place. Not to mention that having the man sighted a long way from here could only increase the colony's security, next to the trail going cold on its way here. Besides, if he kept taking crazy risks, then eventually his luck or tenacity would run out, and that would be the end of it.
The fucking dinosaurs built a spaceship, he said flatly.
It wasn't a question so much as a simple statement of disbelief. Yep, Saunders said with his apparent trademark, I couldn't give a fuck even if somebody else did all the heavy lifting attitude, but also with the total assurance of somebody who knew that what they were saying was absurd and yet sincerely believed it to be the truth.
I asked for a fucking debriefing, not a flight of fancy.
Space dragons, fucking X-Files grey aliens, blue giraffes, raccoon people, and yep, the dinosaurs built a fucking spaceship. Not my fault the universe is totally fucking mental, Saunders objected. He sniffed and added, fucking good spaceship, too. Powell sat back and considered as Saunders rambled on at length about saurian robotic terminators, stasis chambers, the trouble with blue fur, statues, collapsing buildings, missile writing, Volza writing, and how much he hated fire suppressant, black holes, and Dara Houston. The whole monologue was being recorded for transmission back to Earth. How much of it was true or even plausible wasn't a matter he intended to waste much time and thought on, but he did notice that while Saunders mentioned something called the hierarchy a couple of times, he didn't elaborate on who or what said hierarchy might be. When it came up again, he finally had to interrupt.
Okay, that's the third fucking time you've mentioned this hierarchy. Who in the hell are they meant to be? He demanded.
Saunders had the good grace to look embarrassed. Long and short of it, they're the Space Illuminati.
Oh, for fuck's sake!
Powell exploded to his feet, spun away from his desk, and pinched the bridge of his nose as he stood facing the corner for a second, head bowed.
I have no idea why I don't just assume you're taking the piss, he muttered.
I know a few things. They're beyond cutting edge. They've got a fucking army, and they love robots. Oh, and they can copy their brains away.
Great,
Powell muttered. He turned and considered things.
Bloody hell, why in God's name do I believe you, Saunders?
Don't fucking ask me, the Australian gave him a wide-eyed shrug. I hardly believe all this shit. But you do have a crashed hierarchy ship sitting offshore.
Not like I can do aught with it,
Powell grumbled as he sat down again. Nobody on his team was even remotely qualified to handle, salvage, or work with non-human technology. A critical mission oversight in retrospect.
And here I thought this debriefing was going to make my job less fucking difficult, he mused.
Adrian shrugged. You can't, he said. Powell, distracted by his own thoughts, didn't catch the inflection properly.
Can't what now?
He asked. You can't do anything with it. I probably can, Adrian repeated.
My lads and the SEALs could dive that wreck, no problem. But we wouldn't know the warp engine from the shitter, Powell said. You saying you would?
I rebuilt a dinosaur spaceship and killed a fleet of fucking assholes with it, Saunders boasted, looking as if he were regaining a degree of focus. There was a hint of the once professional soldier in the way he spoke. I'm not saying it's recoverable, but if it is... Powell considered, scratching his own facial hair.
If it is, you might actually turn out to be not a complete fucking liability after all.
Saunders' professionalism slipped again, and there was a certain manic glint in his eye that only reinforced Powell's conviction that he belonged as far away from Cimbrean as possible if the colony was to succeed. I was going to take some hard fucking revenge on these fuckers anyway, so, it's no problem, he said. Powell weighed his options. Unstable though he was, Saunders was the only man to hand who had the knowledge and experience necessary to do anything with the crashed hierarchy ship before the saltwater completely ruined it. And if they were as dangerous as he suggested, then his mission demanded at least sweeping the thing for tracking devices, beacons, or other potential mission compromises, not to mention intelligence for long-term threat.
Fine, he relented. You get to dive that wreck. You find any intel we can use and turn it over, and I might even drop the whole never come back thing. Now, I'm still kicking you off this planet because I need trouble like you a long way from my mission. But if you can prove you're not a complete cock-up and turn up aught that's useful and rip out and destroy anything that might lead this hierarchy here, well, there's the deal.
Honestly, I doubt it even has what I want, Adrian confessed. But I'll sure take a look. What about after I've left? You got a phone number?
Next best thing, Powell said. You know Star Trek?
Yeah, my old man had an obsession.
Good. Then you should remember this. There's an agent we use. He handles courier work, messages, and odd jobs for us. He's got an interstellar datanet Dropbox. If you have a message for us, send it there and he'll pass it on. The address is November Charlie Charlie 1701. Got that?
Got it, Saunders nodded, the soldier showing again for a second in the attentive way he gave his undivided attention to the important information.
You know how to stay secure online?
I've got a guy who can crack cybersecurity like an egg, Adrian reassured him.
You trust him?
We've seen a lot of shit together, so you know how it is. I know he's not hierarchy. That would have been good enough for Powell had the Australian been talking about a fellow human. But only one name in the story he had just told fit that description.
You don't mean this Asket bloke, do you? I thought you said he was Kortai.
Trusting a Kortai with valuable information was, as far as the analysts back on Earth had been concerned, about the same thing as trying to carry boiling oil in a colander. The only way it could end was you'd get burned. You only told them secrets if you wanted those secrets to fall into enemy hands. He is, Adrian acknowledged, and I've almost never wanted to kill him.
Whatever, Powell sighed. I guess trusting you with this means trusting whoever you trust in turn. Just don't send in the clear and use a code name. Kirk, Enterprise, and Federation are already taken. Got that?
Adrian considered, and then an impish grin parted his beard. Reckon I might go with Captain Scarlet. Looks like I'm breaking the theme.
If playing the fucking special snowflake is what floats your cock, sure, whatever, Powell told him. Got anything more to add before I let you bugger off and start building your pet starship?
Just one thing, Adrian replied, shifting forward in his seat. I'm about to start waging my own personal fucking war on an enemy I can't even imagine. If you've got a wish list for some souvenirs, just let me know. He wasn't engaging his brain, or else that list should have been obvious. But then again, Powell knew the value of repeating things in case something had been overlooked.
Anything that proves that they exist and aren't just your imagination,
he said, extending his fingers to the list of items he could think of.
Bleeding edge technology, alien hard drives, journals, logbooks, computers, that kind of thing. A working cloaking device, or at least one that's not too badly broken. Maps, encryption keys, intel, basically.
You need a cloaking device? Saunders asked, sounding faintly incredulous. He waved his arm vaguely towards the tent wall, indicating the unseen crashed starships outside. You've got half a dozen wrecked hunter ships laying all over the place.
Bloody lovely, Powell agreed. Now, if you can point out which bit of the fucking things is a cloaking device, I might consider it a tick in that not a complete waste of space column.
Saunders scowled. Your confidence is fucking overwhelming, he grumbled. I'll put it on the list of shit I have to do.
Saunders, Powell warned. As far as I'm concerned, the only thing that makes you worth the oxygen you're breathing is that you're the only bastard on this planet who knows a spaceship's ass from its elbow.
He looked Adrian dead in the slightly crazed eye.
Remember that,
The intimidation tactics didn't seem to work. Saunders seemed to take it more as a joke than as a reminder of just how tenuous his position was, and grinned. I'll remember, he promised.
Right.
Powell nodded upwards towards the door, dismissing the man.
Now fuck off.
Brick, New Jersey. Not that it was easy to tell. The concrete, it was made of hexagonal slabs of poured concrete rather than asphalt, had been breached by trees, and the forest that violated the hardtop was just as dense along the road's length as in the good soil to either side of it. It must have been, 100 years or more since it had been last maintained. Had we not stopped to examine the dying creature, we might just have stepped over the concrete road surface, dismissing it as a rock formation. But once you saw the hard straight lines to the carriageway's edge and saw the material for what it was, other details made themselves known. The way that little clump of tangled thorny vegetation over there had a suspicious hint of rusty metal chassis, and the way that the creepers and vines over there seemed to have grown down from some kind of scaffold, that sort of thing. Everything was so green and alive that it all but completely obscured those fingerprints of an industrial civilization. There are only so many ways to build a car, I suppose, and only so many ways to reliably make it move. Only so many ways to build an internal combustion engine. All fancy and artistry aside, engineering is the art of effecting an efficient solution to a problem, and air resistance is much the same everywhere in the galaxy, as too are the demands of being able to readily carry a reliable and efficient fuel source. The point is, there they were. Cars, road signs, clear and visible signs that once upon a time, Prathama had been home to a civilization every bit as vibrant and technologically proficient as our own was in the latter half of the 20th century. A civilization that was, it seemed, utterly dead. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I am the Casual Deathworlder, your host, and this has been The Deathworlders, Chapter 13, Part 1. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. I know I enjoyed making it for you. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment and smash that like button down below. If you'd like to hear the rest, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button or follow depending on whether you're on YouTube or Rumble. As always, first shout out goes out to my editor, Graygor. Thank you, buddy. I couldn't do this without you. Keep up the good work. And a second shout out goes to my favorite angry newfie, my good buddy Ragnar Starquester. If you ever hear this, buddy, ping me, let me know. Okay, yeah, the story is really starting to pick up pace and starting to come together with other adjacent stories. Much of this, Adrian Saunders' involvement here, is essentially a retelling of events from Salvage, more from Powell's perspective than Adrian's, but it's a very interesting perspective. And yes, I know my Australian accent is abysmal. My apologies. Okay, Well, that being said, I guess my question for the episode would be, given what you just heard of my Australian accent, does anybody here really think that I should do Salvage? Leave your comments in the leave your answers in the comments down below. In the meantime, y'all be safe, be good, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.